Hello, world singers. My name is Brooke.
And I'm Tyler.
And this is
Cosmere Conversations. Hello, everyone. We have an incredibly exciting episode today. We are here with artist Shayndl Green, and we're going to, help with the distribution and the launch of their latest book, Looking for the Light, which has several beautiful works from the Cosmere. But Shayndl has been working in the fantasy and as well as maybe sci-fi fields and kind of creating a lot of iconic work that has quickly become iconic.
Totally. If you've been anywhere on the Cosmere social media, you've definitely seen Shayndl's work.
And so we are very honored and blessed to have Shayndl here. Shayndl, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very flattered by your introduction, and so thank you very much.
Yeah, of course. And so when we rarely have guests on the podcast, I think one of the favorite things to do, instead of asking like your astrological sign as if it's a teenager's first date or something like that, we instead get to ask about your background in the Cosmere. Do you have a favorite character in the Cosmere, or are you aligned with an order of the Knights Radiant? I think that helps everyone kind of get a quick vibe.
It's a good intro question.
So when I took the Knights Radiant test, I got Edge Dancer. Very close behind was Windrunner, which I thought was very apropos because my favorite character is Adolin, who would be an Edge Dancer if, Maya were to be his friend. But Kaladin, I like to put them like on a very, very close pedestal because those are my two favorite. I think in terms of like characters that I identify the most with in the Cosmere, I always say if you could kind of blend Shallan and Sereni, that would be like my personality.
I love it.
That is a wonderful combination, and we also are Windrunner and Edge Dancer, respectively.
Oh, cool.
So it's just a fun.
We should have a lot in common.
Yeah.
Taking kind of that and then just like jumping into some of the questions about your artwork specifically. Kaladin, Adolin, are those also your favorite people to what do we even call it? Digitally paint?
Draw?
Paint?
Yeah.
What is the preferred medium you prefer?
So I say either draw or paint, either interchangeably. It gets a little bit confusing with the terminology when you add in digital. I would say I really love drawing Kaladin. There's something very expressive about Kaladin. Adolin is one of the hardest characters for me to draw, unfortunately, because I do love him. But there's something about him that I find really challenging to capture. Maybe it's because I have this idealized image of him in my head, and so it's just never going to look the way that I want him to. That being said, I did a piece recently of Adolin that I actually did kind of come close to what I was thinking of him, but I draw Kaladin a lot. There's something very expressive and emotional about Kaladin.
Yeah, obviously he has so many emotional moments that can then be rendered into a wide variety, I think, of visual images, especially when you factor in Syl also, and kind of like incorporating their relationship, which I think you've done a few times, which is really cool.
The thing, Stormlight is actually, it works really well with my style because a lot of my paintings are very focused on light and like special effects lighting. And so Stormlight like works right, in that. And also blue is like a really great color in terms of for lighting and things like that. So it just works really, really well. And that could be another reason why I gravitate so much towards Stormlight characters.
Yeah, that kind of brings up the question of like, what is your background in art? How did you start creating? Kind of what was that process of creating your own kind of signature style?
It's so funny. I was mostly self-taught. Here's where I'm going to shout out my grandfather because my grandfather's an artist and he was so encouraging of me throughout like my whole life. He would, every time I would show him a drawing, it was, wow, look at that. And he was amazing and, kind of got me even like, bought me my first MacBook so I could really work on that in that way. And so he's just been enormously influential for me. I didn't really get into digital art until probably around 2016. And I was just really enamored by, I was seeing these artists like Ross Draws and Lotus Bubble. And I was like, I want to do that. I knew that lighting was the area that I really loved. I was a huge, going back to my grandparents had a big painting, Thomas Kincaid painting over their fireplace.
Wow.
And I was just obsessed with the way that he, painted light. That was his whole thing. Like he was a painter of light. And I just felt that I did, kind of work a little bit with oils and some other mediums, and I just could never get the effect that I wanted. And so when I saw the digital artwork that other people were doing, I was like, I want to learn how to do that. And so that's really where I started with digital artwork.
Cool.
And from there, you kind of transitioned into fantasy and sci-fi inspired works, or was that always something that was a part of your process from a young age and kind of a young artist, or is it something you found later?
I've always been into fantasy. I really don't remember a time when I wasn't. This also probably comes from my grandfather, whose favorite TV show is The Vampire Diaries. So like, it's just, I think, in my blood. I go to watch Marvel movies with him. Like, he's great. So I think like I've always been really into fantasy, and I was always like, I was copying the covers of books that I was reading at a young age. I think when I was doing a lot of oil paintings, I felt, because when you're painting on a canvas, it's a lot more expensive because I have that one canvas and I can't repaint anything on it. So I felt very pressured to paint things that I could hang up in my house. And I don't think my parents wanted pictures of Kaladin. But then once I was doing digital art, and I can create, thousands of digital, pieces. So I knew that I wanted to, it's a way for me to connect to the characters. And I've always loved to draw and paint, these, fantasy worlds and things like that. And so I just translated that to digital art.
That is so interesting because, that is the primary difficulty historically with creating artwork, is that it's insanely expensive. Paints and pigments are expensive. The canvas, it takes so much time that in the past Renaissance era, you had to have like patrons who are willing to pay very successful and capable artists, but then you would have all the other people who were lesser than Leonardo da Vinci, who were still talented and capable, but they didn't have the resources to really explore their gifts or their interests. And so that transition to digital is so interesting, which kind of brings up, how do you find it being a modern content creator, using the internet, Instagram? I don't know if you're on TikTok or any of the other social media as kind of like your primary distribution method, but how do you find that part of the work?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's the good side of it and the bad side of it. Just kind of jumping off of what you said before. I mean, I think the best part of having, social media for artists is really that there are so many people making a living off of, artwork, more so than I think probably any other time in history. Don't fact check me on that. But yeah, I mean, so there is that aspect of it. And there are so many people who are creating just phenomenal artwork. It used to be, if you wanted to be an artist, you had to be really wealthy, like you were saying. And now it's just, I mean, I know, an iPad is expensive, but it's a one-time purchase. And then, you have the tools that you really can create very professional looking artwork. So that part of it is fantastic. And also that so many people get to see your artwork. I sometimes I get a lot of comments of people who maybe see the characters differently than I do. And they'll say, that's not what Kaladin looks like. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if I'm getting those negative comments, it means that there are a lot of people seeing your work. When I started out on Instagram, I had like a couple followers. No one was giving me negative or positive comments. So I will take, the negative and the positive comments. It's a sign that I think, thank God my work is speaking to people.
Yeah, I think that's such a interesting point that you make of people seeing the characters differently. I always think it's really cool that Brandon Sanderson has been really vocal about wanting to keep space for each fan to imagine the characters the way that they want to imagine the characters, and even how flexible he is with pronunciation and really just being like, look, they're made up words, say them however you want, which is very cool. And I think it's always interesting to see how different artists depict the different characters and how we all almost co-create the characters in a weird way too, because there's also some characters that I have a hard time imagining, and then I'll see one of your portraits or another Cosmere artist depictions of that person, and it kind of helps me then imagine that character as well. And so it's such a cool part of the fandom that we all get to share this magical world that only exists in our heads.
Yeah, and I think also the Coppermind is extraordinarily helpful. Like I always try to be as loyal to the books as possible. And there are just, I think, for those of us who are really invested in the Cosmere, we are really into like, what do they all look like and things like that. But there are a lot of people who just read them, just for fun.
Yeah.
And they don't necessarily know that, for example, like that the Alethi have, more Asian style eyes and things like that. And so people get very frustrated with me. And then I'm like, I'll just post the text and be like, this is the word of Brandon. But, I got into a whole argument with somebody once about Shallan. They were like convinced that Shallan, and I was like, no, she has the lighter skin and the freckles, but she still has the more Asian eyes.
Yeah.
And so it's really funny you get into these conversations with people sometimes. But, oh, well.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is always the quote unquote fun of being on the internet. There's always going to be someone with a different opinion and that wants to share their opinion. I think that kind of brings us perfectly to Looking for the Light, which is your fourth published art book. How would we phrase what this is? It's not a traditional novel or anything like that, but it's a collection of a bunch of your work. So how would you define that?
I think the technical term is a zine. I think is what it's
Love
called. Zine it's called a zine, or an art book is I would call it also. So either way, I think like in the technical like art world they would call it a zine, which is sort of like a very professional looking booklet. Yeah, so I think this is the fourth one that I've released, which is really crazy, and thank God it's been going really well. So people seem to really enjoy it and really like it.
Yeah, we'll definitely have links so that everyone can check out Looking for the Light and some of the works there. A lot of your creations are character focused and kind of really representative of these characters that people have come to love, over 4,000 plus words in the Stormlight Archive or in other of Brandon's works. How did you arrive on this title of Looking for the Light, and how are you inspired by these characters that we could see in this book?
So the title was actually, it's a kind of an interesting story. All of the other books that I have released were one word titles. So I had Illustrate, Animate, Illuminate. And for this book, I wanted to do something a little bit different, partially because I was running out of words that ended in ATE, but also partially because I wanted to be a little bit more meaningful. And so there's really two meanings behind it. One is that I think my artwork, like I was talking about before, is very focused on light and painting light. And so I thought that was kind of a cute little nod to my, artistic style. But also it was, without getting into a lot of current events, it's been a very, very dark year.
Yeah.
And there was certainly a time period this year where I physically couldn't draw anything. It was very shocking. It's never happened to me before. Like even, in very difficult times, that's always been a release for me. And it was just like, I just lost the ability to draw for a few days. And so when I was thinking back to, this is a collection of works from this year, I really wanted to, having this outlet and these paintings has brought a lot of light back into my life. And I was, I think for a lot of people, for various reasons, this was a difficult year. And so I wanted, this to be sort of a bringing light back, or that in very dark times, you do have to look for things that are light. You do have to look for happiness. And so that was sort of what I wanted to, invoke in the title and with these pieces in general.
So beautiful.
I completely agree. And I think that that's a wonderful way to find yourself, much like Kaladin in
I was going to say
times.
It's so thematically appropriate to the Cosmere.
And you
It
also
does work for the Cosmere too.
You have one of, I believe, your recent works, the Dog and the Dragon. Is that one in this book, or is that from before?
So just clarify for me, I've done a couple of Dog and the Dragon pieces. There's two that I did for this book. One is a dog looking up at a dragon.
That one, yes, a kind of golden retriever looking guy.
Yeah. There's a story behiid that one too, because I got a couple people saying to me, this dog in the story was not a golden retriever. I was like, I know. But I claim artistic license.
Yes.
As does Hoyd, because there's no dogs on Rashar. He doesn't know anything.
Exactly. Like as if, exactly. So that piece, it's really just before I get into the story about why it's a golden retriever and not a beagle. That piece really, every time I do a Dog and the Dragon piece, it gets so much attention and so many people commenting. And I think it's because that story hits something very intrinsic inside of us. I think it's a really profound story. I hope that Brandon does. He said that he wants to do like a children's book
of
it. And I think that's I think it would be wonderful. I'm as a teacher, I know a lot of kids that would probably really benefit from that kind of story. So I think it just like hits something. So I think, it really resonates with a lot of people. But then the reason why it was a golden retriever, my grandparents had a golden retriever when I was growing up that I was super, super attached to. And he died when I was 12, but we were like best friends, when we were really little kids. And so I wanted it to be like kind of an homage to Quincy as well. So.
Aww. That's so sweet.
Yeah, I'll shout out to Quincy's and all the Quincy's everywhere.
Yeah.
I think that dogs in general have a great ability to remind us of the light, but then so often the problems that we are facing or the difficulties that we are facing are bigger, and they feel like, oh, you dog, you can't possibly understand. And that's why as Hoid tells Kaladin, there may be dark times ahead, or I can at least promise you that for you there will be dark times ahead, but you have to keep trying it and keep looking for that light. So thank you so much for kind of sharing the background of that title. I am interested, you've mentioned a couple of times how you like playing with light and using that as kind of a focus of your artwork. Do you start with a desire to kind of paint with light, or do you start with a character and then build from there?
I always start with a character or with a scene, and then the lighting is the last piece that I put in. So it really depends. I always have some very dramatic lighting. It really doesn't matter which character I'm drawing. But if let's say, take Kaladin, for example, I will start with a very base, image of Kaladin that I want to create, the poses and things like that, do all of the rendering for the character. And then I go back and I add in the special effects lighting. And then from there, I will, kind of tweak it a little bit and say, well, if the lighting was here, where would the reflections be and things like that? I hope that makes sense.
It does. Absolutely.
Lots of artistic jargon.
No, not at all. It's all perfect. I am really interested in just kind of that process for you. As we said, most of the work that you're doing is character work or combining different characters. Are there any so far that you find really difficult to do, or that you want to paint and just haven't kind of found the inspiration or haven't found an ability to do them yet?
I don't know if I get a lot of comments of people asking me to do characters from Mistborn Era 2, which Mistborn Era 2 was not my favorite series in the Cosmere. And so it's harder for me to get inspired to draw. I have done a few. I don't think I've ever done Wayne though. And I really should. And I would say the hardest character to draw, and this I've heard from several other Cosmere artists, is Dalinar. Dalinar is a really hard character for whatever reason. I've heard a lot of other art. I've spoken to a couple other Cosmere artists, and they're like, "Oh yeah, Dalinar is really hard to draw." So I've done a couple pieces of Dalinar, but he's a hard one to draw.
Interesting. What do you think makes it more difficult to draw Dalinar?
I think probably because of the way that he's described in the book, where he's described as being not particularly good looking, but he has like a very striking, commanding presence, and so it's really hard. I think it's the same thing with Adolin, that there are also a lot of people that are so attached to Dalinar that they have like an image of what he looks like in their head. And so there's just always going to be that like dissonance between what you see on, on the screen or on the page versus what he's like, how he's described in the book. So maybe that's it. I don't know. I'm not exactly sure, but that would be, yes.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. If I remember correctly, there's not a whole lot of like visual description of Dalinar in specifics anyway. It's a lot more like abstract description, which I could totally see that would then be really difficult to draw.
Yeah, I think also there's this weird thing about like ages in the Cosmere that I'm always surprised to find out how old people are. So I think that they describe like Dalinar and Navani as being like really old, and then it turns out they're like both in their 50s.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not, not that old. I think that there's some of that as well, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay, lots of great stuff about the artwork and kind of the business. Now let's just get into the crazy speculations and theorizing about the Cosmere, because you are already name dropping like a true pro. I can tell that you're an upper echelon fan. So do you have any fun theories for Stormlight Archive 5 or for the greater Cosmere?
I am not the best at the theorizing. I do every Sunday with CJ from Cosmere Quandaries. I don't know if you know him.
Yeah,
so
I'm gonna be paneling with him at the con.
Awesome.
Actually, yeah, we just got
CJ.
connected.
Yeah, he's great. So we do on every Sunday, actually, we go through the preview chapters that have been released. We talk about all of them. And sometimes we have other people come on and join us, and they are amazing at like coming up with these theories. I am not so good at the theorizing, but I think without kind of giving away anything that's going on in the preview chapters, I'm pretty sure that this is the last time we're going to see Dalinar. My theory has always been that Dalinar is going to become a fused, because it seems like that was set up in Rhythm of War, like Chekhov's fused, like you don't name drop that, like, and then just not do anything with it. I used to think that Kaladin was going to die. I don't think so anymore. Those are like my big theories. I don't know. I mean, I think the one I always laugh about this with CJ, that the one that collectively as a fandom we have decided is true is that Chanarach is Shallan's mom.
Yeah. And
I was like, if it's not true, then that's just Brandon also trolling us, because it seems like he has been dropping hints about that.
Right.
So I think like collectively, like as a fandom, we're like, yeah, no, that's not even a theory anymore. That's just the case.
Yeah, it does seem like we've all really adopted that one.
Yeah.
Which I think there's a really good case for it. For any of our listeners, we've got an episode all about it where we like look at all of the evidence, and I think it's pretty solid.
Yeah.
And as you said, Brandon keeps trolling when people try to pin him down on this question, but we got to wait for Stormlight 5, maybe beyond, actually get full confirmation of that.
Are you headed to the con this year, Shayndl?
I am. This is my first time going to any con, actually. And also it's my first time going to Dragonsteel Nexus. So I'm super, super excited. It really almost didn't happen. And so, thank God I was able to make it work.
Yeah, that's so exciting. I saw you talking in your Instagram stories about how it might be a little bit difficult because it is coinciding with Shabbat. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I heard you kind of throwing around the idea of getting a bunch of Jewish Cosmere fans together and like all doing Shabbat during the con. Is that something that's going to happen?
Yeah. So this was last year when Brandon announced that the con was going to be over Shabbos. I was like, oh, well, there goes me ever going.
Yeah.
And then I was like, well, wouldn't it be really fun? We'd call like a Shabbaton, which means that you're with a group of people for Shabbos somewhere at like a resort or something like that. So I was like, wouldn't it be really fun? There's a lot of Jewish Cosmere fans. And so I kind of just put it out there into the ether. And then somebody who I do know contacted me and they were like, let's do it.
Yeah.
And so we've been working on it. We have a whole Discord where we've been talking about all the different things that need to happen it's a really complicated thing to try to work out. But we've been working really hard, and we have about 25 people who are going to be joining us for Shabbos, which is amazing. It's a little bit complicated because we have to bring all of our own food, and there are certain things that you can't do on Shabbos and things like that. So it is quite complicated endeavor, but it seems like it's a go for right now. So it's really, really exciting.
That's so exciting. I love that so much. That just the like overlapping circles of connection between people and people coming together. I love it. And props to you for kind of putting the idea out there and making it happen.
So I just want to shout out Sir Banana the Orange Cucumber, who is the one who's been, I don't know if you guys know him, but that's his name on social media. He's the one who actually, by the way, he's the one who got me my ticket to Dragonsteel. I should say the story because it's really incredible. Because I live on the East Coast, the tickets for Nexus dropped, and I thought I was at school. And I was like, well, it's okay. I'll just wait till I get home. There'll be tickets because the past years, like there were tickets up until like November.
Of course.
I come home like all the tickets are gone. So then I thought, okay, well, I was like really disappointed, but I was, well, that's just the way it is, And I was hoping like maybe they'll drop more tickets later in the year. I was super disappointed. I was hearing everyone talking about how they're going to Dragonsteel. And then that night I open up TikTok and I see a message from Sir Banana, and he was like, do you still want to go to Dragonsteel? He had sat by the computer and just refreshed for hours until somebody returned their ticket.
Oh.
And he was able to get it for me, which was really, really incredible. So I owe a lot to him. And he's also been the one, really organizing this Shabbaton and getting all the food and figuring out all of the logistics. So it's been a lot of fun to meet a bunch of like other Jewish Cosmere fans. So it's been a really incredible experience. I hope that it's going to be an incredible experience in December. And so I'll be at the con mostly on Thursday.
Yeah.
Probably a little bit Friday morning and maybe a little bit Saturday night. But it's really fun and very exciting.
That's
awesome.
Yeah, completely awesome. Really great that Sir Banana could make that happen and is part of so many of you making that possible.
That's like one of the really great things about fandom, I think, is the way that we're able to connect with other people online and forge these connections that maybe we wouldn't have had otherwise, and like the way that it brings people together unites them.
Yeah.
that in December that is going on. We are recording this in early October, so the time of the Jewish New Year. Lashana Tova Tikatevu to you. And
wow.
I hope that you are having a great experience at this time. I've always found something really beautiful about Judaism is the way that Hebrew as a written language and as a spoken language has, to me, so many musical feelings, and just the way that then in Judaism, the practice of recitation always sounds to me musical. And I was wondering if that is something that you feel, and if it's something that then is incorporated into your artwork as well.
Yeah, actually, the Torah is described as a song, so you can just sing it as one very, very, very long song. Music is a huge aspect of Judaism and of all of the holidays. And even if you were to go to a shul or a synagogue, you would hear that the way that we recite the Torah is very much sung. There's like a tune to it. And yeah, so yesterday was Rosh Hashanah, and also you spend many hours on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur specifically in shul and synagogue, and most of it is sung. And there's like songs that are very slow and more sad, and then there are songs that are a little bit more upbeat and fun. And I was actually thinking about this recently because I've always had a hard time kind of visualizing the singers, the sound of the singer languages and things like that, the rhythms. And then as I was thinking about it, I was like, there, to a certain extent, it is kind of similar to, some of the prayers that we say, where that you do change the cadence, you do change the rhythm, things like that, depending on what word or depending on what's happening in the line. So I think that Brandon does have a lot of Jewish references in the Cosmere. I don't think that one was specifically one of them, but it was just something that, helped me to relate to that aspect of it.
Yeah, that's a great kind of touchstone, because I also have a hard time kind of imagining how the rhythms would work in the singer culture. And it's always nice to have kind of a real world analog that you can use as a reference point in your mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then because we know with light weavers, and Shalon is our main example, their abilities do kind of like cross from the manipulation of light, which certainly you do as an artist, but also the manipulation of sound. Either those are the same things to a light weaver, or they're both controlled by a light weaver. And so I was curious, do you listen to music, or do you have a deep background in music as well? Or are you just on the light side specifically?
I do somewhat. My father is very, very musical, plays a lot of instruments. He was a music major in school, so music was like a big part of my life growing up. But I also was in a choir when I was in high school, and we recorded albums and we did shows.
Oh my gosh.
And in the summer, I work for a performing arts camp where I do a lot of the, I teach singing and stuff like that. So yeah, I would say that music is a big part of my life as well. I don't know if I'm sure it does have connections. I think that a lot of times it goes together, the visual medium and, audio. But so yeah, it's always been something that's been around in my life. Both music and art have been very influential.
Let's talk about some more fun stuff. I am curious if you have ever been commissioned to create, or if you've ever created yourself any fun relationships from any of the Cosmere stories. Maybe things that definitely did happen, like Adolin and Shalon, or things that people wanted to happen, the fanships.
I don't think I've ever been commissioned to do that, but I think I've done at least one painting of Shalon and Adolin's wedding, which is something that I was always very disappointed that we never got in the books. So I think I did one painting of that. I don't know off the top of my head if I've ever done any others specifically that are like, wish, fandom paintings. So I have to think about that. But that's the only one that comes to mind is the Shalon and Adolin wedding scene.
I'm going to have to look for that. I would love to see that.
Yeah, it's not my favorite painting, to be honest. I think it's from a couple years ago. But if you really want to find it, you have to scroll really far back.
Maybe you're due to do another one.
Yeah. Yeah. So we'll see after Nexus. We'll see what people say about the Shalon and Adolin wedding ball.
Yeah.
Maybe we could do another piece for that.
Yeah, the World Singer Ball, I know, is supposed to be the reception to their wedding event. So we definitely need some more visualizations of the wedding itself. Curious about some of the other works that you've done, the other series that you have created from. The one that I recognized was Pierce Brown's Red Rising series. And I was, curious, Do you create because you know there are fandoms around these different book series, or are they always things that you are really interested in and are a fan of, and then you decide to create a Red Rising piece or any of the other works that you have kind of pulled from?
I think that for me, in order for me to create a drawing or a painting, I have to be really attached to the characters or the book. The reason why I create fan art is to connect to the characters in another way. So I think of it sort of how I think maybe, you know, people who write fanfic feel that they want to live in that world a little bit longer. And that's the same feeling that I have. So if I read a lot of books, I don't create fan art for like 90% of them. There has to be something really emotional connecting to me through either a character or a moment or something like that. And Red Rising was like that for me. I just very deeply connected to the story and the characters, and I wanted to create fan art. It works out for me that both of those are pretty popular series. So, you know, I can get, you know, the fandom from both of those series. But I do create for other books as well. Fireborn is another series that I really love. That's a little bit of a smaller YA series that I talk about all the time. And I've done pieces from that. So I do create from some other, but I do at this point I mostly focus on Cosmere with some Red Rising mixed in.
Do you think that the overall darker tone, I've heard some people call it like sci-fi grimdark in Red Rising, influences your art compared to something like the Cosmere, which while has sad moments, I would say is definitely not as dark as
more
Red
optimistic.
Rising. Yeah, just an overall more optimistic vibe. Do you feel like that is seen in your artwork, or is kind of your artwork maybe separate from those vibes that the books give off?
I don't know if I'd actually call Red Rising grimdark, although I think it is darker than, let's say, the Cosmere, but I don't know if it would be like full on grimdark. I would say that it is much easier for me to create Stormlight pieces because there's more wiggle room with actual fantasy. With Red Rising, I have to, you know, be a lot more meticulous about create like armor and things like this. Is why I never draw anybody in shard plate. It's just murder for me to draw things like that. So if you see a lot of my Red Rising pieces are like really focused on the face. There's not a lot of like detail in, you know, the landscapes or things like that. Just because it's something that's a little bit more challenging for me. And like I said, yeah, I think that, you know, Stormlight in particular just works really, really well with my style.
Nice.
How does the comparison between, like, we have a couple of works that I've really liked from your past efforts, and one is Kaladin in the Chasms, and there's the floating Stormlight all the way around. How do you go about approaching a landscape view like that versus a really detailed character work like you're talking about from Red Rising?
So when I'm doing a landscape piece, it's a completely different process than when I'm doing a character piece, because I'm focused much more on the emotion. So the landscape pieces are usually very far back, so you're not seeing, you know, characters' faces. It's much more about using color and lighting to evoke an emotion. And also there's some other like artistic tricks that I can use, so like S curves. The human brain loves that S curve for some reason. It really helps to draw the eye. And so you'll see me using that a lot with Stormlight. You'll see that my Stormlight waves go in an S curve. Also darkening the edges and getting lighter as you go inside, which is what we call like chiaroscuro. I love using that as well. And then just different, if I want it to be like a, you know, more of a somber mode, then I'll do, you know, use more like blues and things like that versus, you know, if I want something that's a little bit more vibrant and uplifting, so you use more like reds and yellows and things in that color palette. When I'm doing a character piece, it's much more about the, you know, emotion in the eyes, what is the facial expression and things like that. I'm less focused on specific colors because I have to focus on the color of the character's skin and things like that. I'm not worried. And, you know, and I do the special effects afterwards. But when you're doing a landscape piece, I have to focus on the colors first.
Interesting. I'm also curious, when you're depicting different characters, how do you try to balance rendering the character in the way that they're described and your own like specific style of how you like to render a face?
Well, I always use reference images. So, you know, I think you have to, unless, you know, I've never met an artist who was like, yeah, I can draw a human face without looking at it.
Yeah.
Not. But so I always have references, and then I'll just use the brushes that I use. I have a very like painterly style, and I think I would refer to it as like semi-realism, where the proportions are pretty accurate, but you can tell that it's not a photo. It's not supposed to look like a photo. You're supposed to be able to see the brush strokes.
Cool. Yeah.
How do you find the overall desire to keep creating and kind of like keep innovating in your style? Obviously, any artist who has talent like yours and is as widely seen as you are, has to put in a lot of time and kind of just like maybe a lot more things that are not seen and works that are created that never get to be shown widely. And so how do you continually find that energy and that effort that is required to eventually get to the point where you are now?
I'm not sure exactly how to answer the question because I think it was just innately, like it was just something that was innate in me that I had to create, I had to draw. So even as a very young child, I just always felt the need to draw, and I would spend hours and hours a day trying to perfect, trying to get better. I used to have a lot of people coming to me and saying, I could never draw like you do. And I used to say back to them, you could, you just have to put in the same amount of time that I have. Like I spend hours a day. I'm not a prodigy. You see these like videos of these like 3-year-olds that are painting masterpieces. Like that wasn't the case. I mean, even if you look back at my Instagram, scroll back a year, I mean, you can see that there's a lot of, growth in my skills. And it's because I really do put in like several hours a day in just working on skills, working on painting, putting out a painting every single day. And if you do that enough, you will see progress. I think different people progress at different rates. So I think that I do have a very fast learning time, but I think really it's just about, putting in a lot of work and just looking at, other artists, trying to copy what they do, not copying them and then putting it out as your own, but you can look at other artists and try and copy their style, and you will learn a lot from that and then just meld that to your own style.
Yeah. I think that's something that's really interesting that I really enjoy about your account also is that a lot of times you show your process of how you put a piece together, and you're really open about your progress in your art and like certain things that you're working on, like, oh, I'm still working on doing a shard plate, and those little things, that ways in which you're still trying to progress your craft. I think is really nice. It's great to have kind of a little bit of insight into the background of how these beautiful works come to be.
Thank you. Yeah, I think, recently I did a piece of Adolin and Kaladin, the back-to-back white spine on cage scene, which was something that I have wanted to do. I have tried to do many times. And actually CJ was the one who was like, you got to just do it. Aww. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to tackle this because I needed to have like landscape, and you need to have emotion. You need to have the characters positioned just right. And it was a super complicated piece. And I was really happy with it at the end. But I did kind of put a disclaimer. I was like, look, I'm not there with drawing shard plate. I did have a couple of people commenting. They were like, what is Adolin's shard plate? I was like, I know, I'm working on it. But I think it's really important because I get a lot of comments from people saying like, my artwork is nowhere near as good as yours. And I mean, that's all art is subjective. But I think just in general, like you look back at some of my older pieces, like, I cringe. I know that people really enjoy them. But actually, this was the reason why it took me a really long time to actually even open up an Etsy shop. And it was Katie Payne, who was the one who really pushed me to do it. And she was like, you are good enough. Like people will want these pieces. And I kept saying like, I was like, I don't know. Does anybody is it good enough? Does anybody really want this? So I owe a lot to her as well.
Aww.
Well, shout out to Katie Payne, another very well-known Cosmere artist. And that kind of brings up a interesting dynamic. Do you maybe feel a responsibility to other artists as well who are starting because of the encouragement that you have gotten from people in the industry that you might feel have been there longer, have more skills, or however you would classify them? Do you feel like that's an important aspect of what you want to do as well, which is like pass on that inspiration to other artists as well?
Absolutely. I mean, this is why I've started recently doing more like actual long form tutorial content. And because I know that there were artists that, were that way for me, that I was able to watch these long form tutorials and it really, really helped. But even on like the business side of it, I've had a lot of artists reach out to me and say, how do I start an Etsy shop? How do I do this? And my door is always open. You can for sure, message me with any questions. I'm happy to help. I think it's, more artwork out there is great. I don't see it as a threat at all. I want more Cosmere artwork, specifically like Warbreaker. I kind of, every time I look up, I'll go onto Pinterest and look up like Warbreaker art, and like the only stuff that comes up is my artwork.
It's yours, yeah.
I was like, I need to see other people's, Warbreaker art. So I want more Cosmere artists, and I'm happy to help anybody who needs it.
Yeah, that's great. I have one of your Warbreaker pieces, Siri piece.
Oh, Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, it has been truly lovely having this conversation with you, Shayndl. As we've said multiple times, we're huge fans. We love your artwork. We love all art in the Cosmere that's kind of bringing to life these scenes and these characters that we have put so much time in. You have a book right now, Looking for the Light, that is available. The link is below. You also have a Instagram, which is instagram.com/ShayndlArt, SHAYNDL_art. And people can find you there or at your website, ShayndlArtOriginals.com. Please check that out. And it doesn't just need to be the hardcover book that was recently released. You also have several other individual pieces that are available on your Etsy shop.
There's lots of prints available in the Etsy shop. I've got a couple in my office that I love. So if you're looking for a little bit of Cosmere art to decorate your walls, definitely check out Shayndl's work.
For the patrons, we are going to do another raffle. We did something similar last year as well. This is how it's going to work. If you would like one of the hardcover Looking for the Light art books from Shayndl Green, you can join our Patreon now, anytime from the moment that this episode drops until the 1st or maybe 2nd of November. You have until that time to join, remain a patron throughout November, and we will select through a randomized drawing a winner for one of Shayndl's hardcover books.
Yeah, these are always so fun to do. The book is gorgeous with all of Shayndl's work. So go ahead and join the Patreon if you're so inclined. Make sure you do so by November 1st, and you can be a part of that super secret, mysterious, random drawing.
Yes, and that drawing will happen at the end of November. So you have to be a patron a minimum of the month of November. That's the best way to think about it. And then you are automatically inserted into a raffle where you can win one of these art books. Thank you so much to all of our existing patrons, as well as anybody that joins up in this next month or so. Normally, when we sign off, we say the first ideal. So Shayndl, we would love to have you join in on that. And you were mentioning that the first ideal is important to you in the same way that's important to us and a lot of people. Did you want to kind of like leave us with that little story?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I first was reading Stormlight Archive, I found the first ideal to be a little bit like hitting it on the nose. And I was like, okay, it's great. Like, fantasy can be a little bit like that. And we were talking about, as of recording this, it's just about a year since the October 7th attacks. And I remember it was, we didn't know about the attacks until after because it was the holiday. And so it was very traumatic to try to sort of find out about it. And like all of it, like the rest of the world knew what was going on. We didn't know what was going on. And, I have a lot of family who were in, dangerous areas and things like family and friends. And so I remember after seeing a lot of the video and stuff that was going around, the thing that was kind of sticking in my head was, life before death. Life before it just kind of kept going around and around in my head. And, afterwards started, having very bad nightmares like shortly after. And I would wake up in the middle of the night and just say it over and over again. Life before death, because that was just the only thing that that it was helping me. And I was like, okay, it's maybe a little bit more impactful than I originally thought. It was just something like a mantra that I could just keep saying, and it really helped me get through. It means a lot to me now.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that, Shayndl. I think we're all crying right now.
Sorry. I did not expect that. I was, I thought that I could say it in a very unemotional way.
But... No. It's an emotional thing that you're sharing. So it's completely understandable to hear that emotion in your voice. I agree with everything that you said. And while have not had the same experiences, the words are meaningful to us as well. And that's kind of like the beauty of it. It's not the same meaning, but it is meaning. And so
thank you for sharing. I think that there are a lot of people for whom these words mean so much for various reasons. Let's share them.
Brooke, can you take us away?
Until next time, life before death.
Strength before weakness.
Journey before destination.